Hello and welcome to World Talks, where every word matters. I'm your host, Sasha Farbach. Donald Trump recently described dealing with Ukraine as more difficult than with Russia, adding to the growing uncertainty surrounding U.S. policy toward Ukraine. Meanwhile, at an emergency European summit on Thursday, EU leaders issued a joint statement supporting Ukraine, but Hungary's Viktor Orban refused to back it. In a display of European unity, France's President Emmanuel Macron suggested that France may extend the protection of its nuclear arsenal to its allies, warning that Europe must be prepared for the possibility that the U.S. may not always stand by its side. Now, in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Now, to discuss all these issues further, I am joined by Aleksander Cwalina, Assistant Director, Atlantic Council, Eurasia Center. Good to have you with us. So let's start with these very different signals from Donald Trump. I know we have a lot of them, but it seems just in the course of a few hours, first on his Truth Social saying very much, I'm quoting here from him, Russia is pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now. I'm strongly considering a large-scale banking sanctions. But at the same time, he's saying it's difficult to work with Ukraine. So what is he thinking? Where's the rationale? And what do you make of these two rather different statements here?
Yes, hello, happy to be on. As you have mentioned, there have been concerning signals coming from Washington regarding the U.S. ability to ensure security on Europe and to provide a leading role on Ukraine. Just as a quick recap, the U.S. has so far given Ukraine more than $180 billion in assistance, with around $66.5 billion in military assistance, which is about 20% of Ukraine's total military supplies. The recent statements, as well as shifting rhetoric from Washington from the Trump administration, has been worrying not only Kyiv, but European capitals, as you mentioned, culminating in the emergency summits in both Brussels and London of earlier this week. This past weekend. To further complicate the relationship, according to a defense official speaking to the Associated Press, Trump's recent order pausing aid to Ukraine included not only military assistance, but also intelligence sharing between Washington and Kyiv, as well as pausing weapons that were already approved and en route to Ukraine. So it seems like at least the overtures from Washington is that Trump, following the tumultuous Oval Office meeting last week, is taking a much harder stance on Ukraine than he is on Russia. However, as you mentioned, the Truth Social post earlier today also hints at a possible harsher words and actions against Russia as well. So it is difficult to tell what the Trump administration might do next, but here's hoping that whatever it does next, that it brings Russia to the negotiating table.
Mm-hmm. As you said there, it's a lot of inconsistencies, but it does seem to have favored, especially in the last few weeks, one side, and that's Russia. With the emergency summit yesterday in Brussels with all the different European leaders, I mentioned there that joint declaration that was 26, not 27. There were that exceptional appendix there that added the special words there in support of Ukraine. But do you think any of this will sway Donald Trump at all into coming back into the fold on Ukraine's side, or is that just a pipe dream?
I remain optimistic on European Union efforts to have the European Union stand on its own 2 feet and provide security on the continent. It is important to note that, for example, the 26 European leaders signed, all but Hungary, signed the text calling for a peace deal that respects Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. However, all 27 leaders greenlit the proposal that could feasibly free up billions of euros for defense spending. This is, I think, in my opinion, quite promising that this amount of funding, sort of putting the money where the mouth is for Brussels, is an important first step on freeing up a lot of funds, freeing a lot of resources for boosting defense on the continent and being more flexible and in cohesion and in joint defense capabilities on the continent. And this is exactly what Washington has been pushing for, what the Trump administration has been pushing for. Trump himself has spoken before on the need for Europe to meet meet similar to either 2% or 5% in the future for European countries' GDP on defense spending. And this is one way that the European Union can best facilitate that for member states and on the continent. So I believe that this is a welcome step for both European security writ large, but also exactly what the Trump administration is hinting that it wants Europe to do.
Right, and we still have to see how that pans out. We've got that other summit on March 20th. We'll hopefully get some more details of what the Commission will propose, what Europe will do to really mobilize a lot of this money, where it's going to go. Let's also focus on that European element. One nation that stepped forward very much in the limelight in the last few days has been France. And I'm just curious about those statements by President Macron, very much saying that he has had discussions and he's already met with Chancellor-in-Waiting Merz in Paris not so long ago. This deterrent, this nuclear deterrent of France, potentially including that for all of Europe. How feasible is this? I mean, at this point in time, I believe the French have the fourth largest stockpile of nuclear weapons, but still far behind those of Russia. How do you see this take shape, and how feasible is such a shield for all of Europe?
It is interesting that you mentioned France's Emmanuel Macron, a role in current peace and ceasefire negotiations. He played also a significant role during the London summit and also on the European summit this week. He told reporters after this most recent summit that France will give Ukraine over 33 billion in assistance taken from Russian assets sanctioned by the EU. Just to recap, Russia has over $300 billion in sovereign assets, which are currently frozen in the EU, and that the fact that there's movement on this material front is promising. It is also interesting that you mentioned Friedrich Merz, the presumed incoming chancellor for Germany, who has also made large movements on increasing the defense package coming from Germany. On the nuclear deterrent, I think this is both a sign that Europe is looking for alternate ways to secure its own defense and security amidst unsteady signals from Washington. The United States has led much of the security and deterrence on the continent, but with unsteady signals from the Trump administration, I see it as very, very likely and understandable that both France, Germany, and even Poland, from recent statements in these past 24 hours, is looking for alternate methods of deterrence, which does also include nuclear weapons. And on its feasibility, I think this is something that we'll see over the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months. As we know, nuclear weapons are a very, very touchy subject, and it is something that I think a lot of countries are unwilling to share freely.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting here that same discussions have been, I think, had also with the UK, also with their nuclear deterrence. But that's, I think, slightly different. I think with Britain, especially with Trident, the submarines, that's actually very much also connected with American support. The French method would be completely, I think, in French hands from end to end. I think that's what Macron said in his speech. But also on Germany, just really briefly, is also an interesting quote I want to share from Friedrich Merz, who also was in Brussels, although he's still not really chancellor yet, nevertheless, I think very likely tipped to be. He said that he fears NATO may not remain in its current form by June with that upcoming NATO summit, and advocated a closer look at basically a different type of security arrangement. What do you make of his quote there? And do you think it's likely, is this just a warning, or could we be looking at a different sort of NATO come the summer?
As you mentioned, the probable incoming chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has played, even though he's currently not yet chancellor, has played a very outsized role during this past summit. He was in Brussels. He was on for a lot of the side meetings following the meeting of the European Council, and does seek to play a large role in dictating European defense and security. In terms of his comments on the future viability of NATO and of European security, I think this is just one of the big unknowns that we currently have for example, there have been statements from Elon Musk disparaging NATO. There have been statements from the Trump administration that bring the Washington's commitment to the alliance in question. I think Europe creating these sorts of contingency plans and putting forward visions of their own security, I think, is not only recommended, but I believe a necessity given the uncertainty coming from Washington. Personally, I do not see it as likely that the Trump administration will go forward with anything that might completely restructure or completely put in question the United States' role within the alliance, but recent mixed signaling that one can describe as either unsteady or questionable from Washington certainly does worry Brussels and other European capitals.
And just a conclusion, because I think I'm curious what you make also of this comment by the Prime Minister of Italy, Ms. Meloni, just really briefly, because she also essentially said that she would like to see not membership for Ukraine, but some kind of extension, maybe of protecting Ukraine, short of membership. What about that? I mean, that's significant from coming from her, someone also close to Trump in the past. What do you make of her statement, just briefly at the end?
Sure, of course. I think one of the biggest questions, what is key is that apologies, let me start from the beginning. I think the main takeaways from a possible ceasefire or peace agreement for Ukraine revolves around the question of how a ceasefire or a possible peace will be maintained. Meloni putting Article 5 into question, I think, is certainly a controversial proposal for the alliance, but we are coming to the point where if we discuss, for example, a ceasefire that is air, energy infrastructure, and naval, as for example proposed by London and Paris in this past week, we do have to sort of discuss how such a ceasefire will be maintained and secured. And I think even though Article 5 is fully unlikely to be accepted by the entirety of the alliance, I think sort of this is a time that requires imaginative thinking to require a sort of ceasefire and security on the ground for Ukraine and methods to maintain it.
Yeah, so a lot of different methods there as Europe keeps prepared on its own potentially, but hopefully with the help of the United States. Very, very intriguing times indeed. That was Aleksander Cwalina. Thank you so much for all of that. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks. My name is Sasha Farbach, but stay tuned right here for more news and commentary on TVP World. Goodbye.